Great. So again, it's great to have Chris Kelly back today, who's from the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, and Dave Chevelle, who's an expert ORN prevention consultant and has done a lot of work on sustainability in the past. And the next slide. The next few slides are about the Opioid Response Network, which for those of you that are familiar, you've seen these before, but this is brought to you today by a SAMHSA grant that has been in place since 2018. And we provide technical assistance for prevention, treatment, and recovery of opioid use disorders. And we think sustainability is a really important part of this work. And the next one, again, the Opioid Response Network takes technical assistance requests for education and training and for communities. And each region is led by a technology transfer specialist. And many of you know, have been working with yours, and they're the folks that help us connect with all of you for this. So if you have any questions or you have a technical assistance request you want to submit now or later on after this project ends, here is the contact information. And again, this is part of a specific SAMHSA grant, and the views expressed here today may not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Health and Human Services. So just a note about that. Our overall mission is to help experts enhance prevention, treatment, and recovery efforts for opioid use disorders and substance use disorders. So our agenda today is we wanted to hear from each of you a little bit about your activities since our last meeting together. And then we're going to have a presentation from Chris Kelly on more content related to sustainability. This focused on working with stakeholders and fiscal sustainability, which is on all of our minds. And then we're going to do a breakout session through Zoom. And so you'll hear more about that at the middle of the meeting today. We'll do a report back from the breakouts. And then Dave Chevelle is going to talk a little bit about prioritization, handling burnout and overload, and recruiting. And I just want to note that throughout the day, we really want to make this interactive. We really want to hear from you. And please raise questions, enter in the chat. If we don't notice your question, raise your hand, and we'd love to make this an interactive conversation. That's how the slides were designed. And then I'm just gonna mention some tips on getting back on track if your work to assess how things are going shows that you need to potentially reconvene a group or find a way to recorrect. We'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about what we're doing next, which is to have some coaching specific to your plan by either Chris, Dave, or myself. And so before we start with the stakeholders, let's do a really quick introduction. I'm Karen Anderson Oliver, and I've been doing some applied implementation science research and consulting. And yeah, I'm really happy to turn off my phone today. Next, Dave and Chris, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hello, everybody. This is Dave Chevelle calling in from Portland, Oregon. And thank you for letting me join your group. And again, I've been doing prevention primarily with coalitions over 30 years now. And most recently, for the last 17 years, I've been contracting with CADCA as a consultant trainer and providing training on the strategic prevention framework. for Coalition. So thank you for letting me join you. I look forward to working with you. And again, I've had the honor of working with Pathways to Life, not only during this, but as one of those training efforts. They attended the training for Coalition that they have been developing and recently received a drug-free community grant from the Office of National Drug Control Policy. So congratulations to them.
Hi, I'm Chris Kelly. I'm a woman in long-term recovery, and I've been working in the field of recovery over the last decade, and most recently, the last couple of years, I've worked for the Great Lakes Addiction Technology Transfer Center, and we recently received a grant, so I'm now a project manager for the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. I love everything about engaging our communities and helping them to bring them in to help design, develop, and implement recovery support services, because I think they're sorely lacking from at that table. And they're actually our best folks that we can ask when we say, what can we be doing better? And that's.
Thank you. And Rachel?
Oh, I wasn't prepared for this. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Whitmer. I am a program manager on the Opioid Response Network, working with the National Coordinating Office of the HETC, which is one of the organizations that is on the ORN grant. Our primary role is doing this technical assistance that you are receiving now. I specifically manage their special projects, so things that aren't part of the day-to-day technical assistance. And I am excited to be here today. I was very ill for the first session, so I missed it. So I'm excited to hear what you all are up to and how it's going.
Yeah, and Rachel's a key part of the team who's been putting a lot of this together for us over the last several months. So thanks, Rachel. And then Nicole.
Hi, my name is Nicole Myers. I'm in the Denver metro area. I work with an agency called ART, Addiction Research and Treatment Services. We are under the treatment umbrella. We're associated with the University of Colorado. My position is Assistant Director of Adult Outpatient. So we have 4 outpatient clinics, and we are pretty connected to the community around us and have several contacts with criminal justice agencies and social service agencies. And part of our sustainability plan is developing and maintaining positive relationships in the community during this pandemic.
Thank you. And Sophia?
So I'm Sophia. I work with Nicole Myers at ART. I'm a substance use treatment counselor over there, and I also am one of the liaisons for the Adams County Recovery Court team. So I work directly with folks that are involved in the legal justice system because of substance use related offenses. Kind of like Nicole was saying, right, maintaining and strengthening and developing those relationships with the community through COVID has been pretty pivotal, focused, and foundational to the work that we do as an outpatient facility for, opioid treatment.
Great, thank you. And then the team from Pathways, starting with, I've got Elise.
I can never find my unmute button. So I am with Pathways to Life and do primarily the marketing and operations, but since we just newly got our DFC, whoop, whoop, we're excited, and I have become the program director of that, as well as trying to do some other critical items for Pathways to Life, and just excited to be here and keep working on our sustainability, not only as an organization, but also as a coalition, because the two are really intertwined.
Thank you. And the beginning of a new initiative or project is a great time to start thinking about sustainability as you do your planning. So excellent. Congrats again. And David Pritchard.
Yes, hello. Nice to meet you all. I'm a volunteer at Pathways to Life. I missed the first meeting, so I'm looking forward to catching up. My role at Pathways is on the operational side. I support Ryan and Aaron and Elise in terms of all the trouble they get up to every day in terms of making things happen. And we've just finished updating our strategic plan and our priorities. So this is all coming along exactly the right time. I'm also a parent. We lost our son to addiction 3 years ago. It was an accidental overdose out in San Diego. So our son Taylor had struggled with addiction for many years. We've been in and out in many rehab and outpatient services, and he was always willing to engage in treatment. And so just become a bit of a student of the whole process and trying to understand how we can help other families that are just going into this and learning about best practices and the best way to help these kids that are in the transition zone, which is what Pathways is all about. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. It's great. It's great to have you here. Let's see. Is Kim on today?
She is not. Her husband is being commissioned. He's an officer here in Georgia, and so he's being commissioned today. So she is not with us, and will listen to the recording.
Okay. Erin.
Yeah, hey guys. I also work at Pathways to Life with Elise and Ryan and David on our strategy team, running the programs at Pathways to Life and assisting Elise with the new grant and coalition.
Awesome, thank you. And then we also have Ryan. Hi, Ryan.
Hey everyone, it's Ryan here in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm also a person in long-term recovery, and yeah, I'm excited to be able to lead Pathways to Life in this season, and yeah, excited to be on the call here and to learn from y'all and to to dive into the sustainability thing. So I'm excited for the opportunity.
Thanks, it's great to have you. And then one of our regional TTSs, Celine Craig, is on. Many of you know. Hi, Celine.
Hey guys, Happy New Year. I'm so sorry, I have to eat lunch. I've been going on back-to-back calls. I'm Celine Craig from Morehouse School of Medicine in Atlanta through Southeast Addiction Technology Transfer Center, and I work on ORN. Rachel works on special projects, and she talked about those daily activities and duties of doing the brunt work on the ground. That's me, and I do that for Georgia, Alabama, and Louisiana. So there's fully a jam-packed schedule in 2021 with daily TA and requests, and this is one of those special projects that needs just as much attention. So we appreciate your participation. And I am on a full day of Alabama favor collaboration for peer recovery right now too. So if I go off screen, it's maybe because they're doing something and I'm on 2 Zooms at the same time, but I wanted to come and support. And thank you, Karen, for my package. I got it too. This is the only gift I received from anything corporate or professional. So I appreciate all the gifts. I love them. They're so cool. And I said $16 for a mask. Woo.
You know what? I got it half off. Don't worry.
Oh, okay. I was like, woo. But thank you so much for inviting TTSs to join as well.
Oh, absolutely. And anyone else? Did I miss anyone on the call today? Anyone else join? I did want to just note before Dave starts in on his talk that my thought with the package was, again, it's just nice sometimes to have things printed out. And so there's some information on a website that Chris will be talking about today. And then also I printed out some materials from the Kansas Community Toolkit, which has a lot of great stuff that I think is relevant to the work you're doing. And then the agenda's in there. And then also, if you have ideas as we go through the day, there's a sustainability action plan template, which I believe is in green for go. I had fun putting this together. And then with the calendar, I thought it would be nice to have a 2021 desk calendar that you could look at and remember these sessions and think about when you see it each month, what you're doing related to sustainability. So I thought that might be a helpful tool. So with that, I apologize. I said it was Dave first. It's actually Chris. So are there any questions before we talk about stakeholders? All right. Well, Chris, you have the stage.
Great. Thank you so much. And again, thank you all for showing up today. I know we all have really busy lives and tight agendas, and we're into a new year. And so taking some time out to join us, I really appreciate it. And I thought maybe I was off the hook there for a minute, Dave, that you could come in and save the day, but now you're going to be stuck with me for a couple more minutes. Talking about stakeholders, so would anybody be willing to just kind of give me a snippet of their understanding or their organization's definition of a stakeholder? Doesn't have to be a written formal definition, but just like, what do you consider stakeholders?
Yeah, invested people that are invested and have interest, vested interest.
And it's funny, but we use that word in our mission statement as an organization.
What is your mission statement? Do you mind sharing it?
Oh my gosh, we just changed it. I shouldn't have said anything. Hold on. I got to go back. I know, like we've been refining all this stuff and it's like, oh my gosh, it's in our, okay, go ahead. Cause I haven't totally got it.
What is their coalition members on it actually and give out gift cards for it?
Right. So it's cultivating meaningful connections to build strong communities, cultivating meaningful connections with students. Well, maybe I don't know it. I guess I just got put on the spot there.
See,
didn't mean for this to be a test.
Hold on, I'll get it. I'll grab it out of my strategic plan and be back with you in 1 second. I know exactly where it is. It's just that
I'm embarrassed.
We're continuing to refine, and that's the way that this works.
Awesome.
And we give each other grace.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, we're still at work. I think we're going to be a work in progress forever. Cultivating meaningful connections with students, parents, and stakeholders to build strong communities.
Nice.
And then the community coalition fits under that as one of the programs.
Yeah. And I applaud you for putting that right in there into that mission, because it shows the broader population that those things are really valuable to you and you keep them right up front. Anyone else want to share their thought or definition of what a stakeholder might be within their organization? No. Well, I think you really got it there. So I think as organizations, we're oftentimes more inclined to kind of focus on that bullet number 2, the formal and informal helpers. So those individuals that engage within our organization, whether it's a volunteer, another like-minded organization, maybe a community we partner with, whether it's another nonprofit, law enforcement, our local schools, or that sort of thing. And so I feel like we really those are our go-tos when we think about gathering our stakeholders. And then sometimes the overlooked group is those most affected by what we're working on. And so my personal experience with this when I was running a recovery community organization here in Minnesota was that we would host like town hall forums and listening sessions and do these larger events to engage our stakeholder audience. But sometimes when we were, again, developing or designing our programs, we didn't always have those folks at the table. And I really think over the years, as we started to be a more inclusive organization and started to invite in those most affected by what we were working on, we really saw this beautiful refinement of our programs and activities. And we were able to really kind of get that laser focus on how does this match up with our mission and our vision. And strangely enough, what I found was that when we were working with those most affected by by the issue we were working on, they sometimes were even better at articulating what those needs looked like and what really a boots on the ground type program would need to offer in order for it to be successful. Because I think we can all say we've fallen victim to receiving grant funding, and that grant funding comes with a list of deliverables. And sometimes that's not a perfect overlay with what our communities need. And so it's our job to meld and form and kind of make it all work together. And so when we have partnering organizations, sometimes our heads are kind of, we get locked into that list of deliverables and forget to lift our heads up and really connect with those people in our community. And so I just like to start off by pointing out that those, those are two groups of stakeholders, and they kind of encompass the different groups that we work with. I don't know if I have to say next slide or not, but I'll say next slide. This is just a nice image that I use on a lot of different presentations I do, because again, it just reminds us in a quick snippet that it's the capacities of local people and their associations that build powerful communities. And then what can we do with what we already have to get what we need? And so I've had a great blessing of working with a woman named Dr. Deetra Hawkins, who actually lives in Georgia. Maybe some of you have worked with her at different crossroads, but she's been a mentor of mine for the last several years. And one of the things her and I often work on together is helping communities look at developing and really being the impetus to a recovery-oriented system of care. And when we come in, a lot of times the questions that come up are, we don't have enough money, we don't have funding for this, we can't take on any extra projects. And throughout the time that we work with them, we're really clear that oftentimes we don't need extra money to do the things we want to do. It's about, again, about kind of reconfiguring and really focusing on those partnerships and never ever feeling like we have to solely own and do and run and oversee and then disseminate all the programming, because we may have a neighbor or another organization in our own community that already offers those type of services. And it's really about partnerships, which is why I will go to the next slide. Oh, I kind of see it down there. I don't know if I can get to that little thing, Rachel. I apologize if I'm just being a Luddite right now.
You can, so don't feel bad.
Okay. So one of the ways that we can start to, at least we want to be able to assess who's at the table, what kind of assets are even available to us. And so when we talk about getting the assets of stakeholders, it's really just saying, what's available within this group of people that we work with. And so we may assume that somebody comes to our table with a certain set of skills, or they came through a certain type of partnership. And then when we start to ask the questions, like, what are your gifts and talents? I ask that at every stakeholder assessment I do, is, what are your gifts and talents? Tell me about that. Because then what I hear are things like, I'm a boxer. I run a book club out of this local community organization. I hear, on the side, I revamp buildings, and just all these beautiful things come up. And what we find is we have a lot more assets at our disposal than if we had just assumed that person was their job title, or the skill, or the things they had, the assets they had to offer were related to their job function. So I think asking that gifts and talents question is really important. It's important for us as organizations to actually go through this process, not just think it, but like actually have a paper trail for it, so that when we're working with a board of directors, we want to ask that question and write down the names of the board of directors, and then write down what kind of assets that they bring to our group. because that can be a historical document that we can call on time and time again, rather than trying to rely on our memories for that. Like, oh, who is that also did some real estate on the side that might know of some buildings that are available for us to lease for this next grant round, or those types of things. And then we can always do a little bit of editing to those lists too, to decide, are there stakeholders that we want to connect with a little bit more deeply. And then we have stakeholders who are really engaged. They want to be engaged in that day-to-day activity. It sounds like David is an example of that, like a volunteer that comes in and they're in it. They know our daily programs. They know what it is we're up to. And then we have stakeholders that want to support what we're doing. They're completely passionate and invested, but they might not have the time to attend regular coalition meetings. They may not have time to volunteer in that capacity for our organization, but they certainly can, they have something to give back to us. So how do we find engagement opportunities for those folks? So then when you start to write this down, you can keep a file of it. So when you start to implement a strategic plan and you're out there looking for these resources, you have this list readily available that you can pull that information from. We can go to the next slide. So I just pulled one short little line out of a stakeholder asset mapping tool. And this is available there. You'll see the, I don't know if this got sent out or not, the full one, Karen, but we can certainly get you a full copy of this stakeholder asset mapping and engagement. But essentially you'd create these columns, these 4 columns, and anybody can be in that fill in the blank area. So you could say, what are the types of assets members of our youth community typically possess? Or you can say, what types of asset are members of from local law enforcement? What do they typically possess? And then go through those lines. And then like, what assets do members of youth for us, specific to our organization, how does that interact? What assets could we link to our programming goals? And then do we need more in-depth assessments of assets with our local youth community, and how are we going to do that? And so again, it just creates this cheat sheet that you can keep on file, so that you're consciously building relationships with these groups, and you remember where you can go back and get that information from. Is the sound okay for this? I know my earbuds were going out before and it was breaking up, so I just want to make sure they're working well. I'm going to pause here and just see if there's any questions at this point. Is this something any of you practice or have done historically?
I was actually just messaging Elise privately. I'm like, I think Elise is really good at linking assets to program goals. She knows kind of what everyone does, even if they're not their job titles. It's like, we have a real estate guy doing our social media marketing, so it's kind of like, she's quick to identify those, but we don't have like a formal written down document. So I think that is a really great idea to have. We can keep pulling from a document of assets we have. Yeah.
And I think that even taking this and going a bit further, you could put people's names in it, and you can then identify their strengths, their passion, because what your strengths are might not be what you're passionate about in this season. As I get older, I found that, these might be my strengths, but they're not really necessarily my passions. I'm just good at it. And I may not want to do that for the organization. I may want to do something else, that's still, and then their time and capacity, and then their connections. Because the other part of it is that I think we forget is that everyone has connection, and everyone's connected to so many different people, and we can leverage those connections. And if we're not careful, we're going to miss that opportunity. And for me, that's probably, and Ryan's really good at this. That's probably one of the things that has kept our organization going strong, is just the connectivity, between people and leveraging relational equity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. When I know, for example, Elise, that like I'm a great project manager, but if I'm volunteering for an organization, I do not want to do project management. Like I want to sign off from take that hat off and I want to go like teach people to bake. I want to use a completely different skill set in that scenario. And so when we ask that kind of gifts, talents, what brings you joy, what are you passionate about question, we see a whole different set of skills pop up, and we can draw upon those. And so I left the Recovery Community Organization in 2018, and I hadn't done this work all along. And so we joke that like the last 4 months of my job was just creating documents of all my connections, how to contact them. I mean, it was like a 27-page document in the end that I had to work on and kind of backtrack because I hadn't done this work just, as it was happening. And so from my personal experience, it's really valuable to just set this up so that if, Elise moves on to a different job, which I know she's not, but if she does, that wisdom and knowledge is passed on. And that essentially is our legacy then as a steward of the organization.
Well, and quite frankly, on a coalition side, your job is to work yourself out of a job. And I don't mean it that way, but it should be sustainable without a person necessarily. It's a role,
Right.
but it's not like defined necessarily by a person. You want that organization to live and breathe kind of, and work because of the community effort and the stakeholder involvement and all of that. And so
Right.
if somebody leading on that coalition takes too much, right, then the whole thing crumbles when that
Right.
person leaves. So,
right. And we never want to do that. No, I really appreciate that.
Another frame on asking about people's interest is asking them why they are involved with the organization. And what's nice is we can revisit that. I put in the chat box a coalition member worksheet where if you record why they're involved, you can periodically go back and ask them, are we meeting your why for being involved with this coalition? And again, keep them motivated if they're feeling like the purpose is being met by working with the coalition.
Right.
Hey, Dave, we took it one step further. And for our coalition, we asked all of our coalition members to actually do a video that was 1.5 minutes long. And they had to sort of do name, rank, and serial number. And then they actually had to videotape their why. And so we're going to use those on our website when we get there.
And that builds that ownership and sustainability if they're being recognized. And we'll talk about this when I do my part, but that's part of building their ownership of the work of the group. Excellent.
Yeah, and then we're using those on social media and our website.
Agreed. And we, in some RASC recovery-oriented system of care coalitions that I coach in Illinois, we've introduced storytelling at the start of every coalition meeting that someone shares their why. And that may change from time to time. And the why, my why today is very different than my why of 2018, and so we ask people to share their stories just for the first couple minutes, and that really I found too helps with new coalition members as we're growing our coalitions. They see this sense of personhood and compassion around the group, and it helps maintain our true north. Like, why did we show up here today for this coalition meeting? Yes, we have an agenda. Yes, we have a set of things we need to do, but also here's our true north, and that's often best described through stories. Next slide, please. So do similar things. The suggestion I have is to do similar things with other organizations and institutions. So you could use that same format to kind of list like what organizations are we connected to now? What organizations do we want to be connected to? And then maybe some that we really haven't thought about. And oftentimes we can get ideas from our board of directors, from our volunteers, from our coalition members. There's all different groups that we can go to form the list of, okay, now we need to do the next step of writing what assets do they bring. And suddenly sometimes, like in the recovery community, I found myself in a situation where, you know, we were kind of banging our heads looking for new space or something like that. And it was really right at my fingertips through one of these different organizational stakeholders. And then again, just through each list that you create and you fill out the little chart, you know, you always want to decide, like, pick one or two that you want to be more in depth with. With other organizations, I've found it really helpful that not only do I invite them to my events, but I show up to their events. And that doesn't always have to be in the form of, you know, getting a table and being a formal sponsor. But as a fellow community member, part of my job of running a recovery community organization was being out there and showing up for other people's stuff. And it really meant the world to them, and showed them that I'm invested in their mission as well. And that I'm not always asking about what, you know, how can we partner about work, but like, how can I support the mission of your organization? And every single time that was returned tenfold back to me. And then we touched on this in our last call, but also when the time comes and SAMHSA puts out a new RFP, we're not scrambling to make those partnerships in the last minute, that we've already created that relationship, and we already have kind of a common understanding about how both organizations work. And it's really easy to call up somebody and say, hey, this looks like a great collaborative opportunity for us to partner and go in on this grant together, and we don't have to try to, you know, kind of quickly assemble a relationship. Any questions on that part?
Chris, this is, I'm just making me realize that this process is really helpful to identify the win-win across organizations, because sometimes that's hard to do, but this process really helps make that come to the surface, to think about what are the things that are really common and what is a win for everybody.
And especially when sometimes often we need these resources most when we're in crisis. So that can be a good crisis. So it could be a windfall of a new grant, you know, new grant dollars coming in, or it could be a less appealing crisis. When I worked at, again, I'll refer back to the Recovery Community Organization, there was a point where our landlord in the building we were in had come in and they actually evicted us because they felt the people we served weren't appropriate to be coming in and out of that building. And so we were in this crisis. Our emotions were really heightened because we felt we were being very discriminated against. We were great tenants. We paid our lease on time. You know, we did everything right. But for some reason, they felt we weren't a good fit after being there about 8 months. And it was really, you know, we were in crisis. And so it was a terrible time to have to try to make new partnerships and make decisions. And so we were able to draw upon some of those relationships we had built through doing some asset mapping and quickly locate a new place that we could move to and, you know, deal with the other stuff later. But again, oftentimes we have to make decisions in that crisis moment. If we have some of this documentation done and these relationships formed, it's much easier to make a sound decision rather than a really reactive decision. I think we can go to the next slide. So I was just going to touch on financial sustainability, because this could be a semester-long college course, and we still wouldn't touch on everything around financial sustainability, but it is really important to review your organization's annual budget. And I really believe in doing this with a full staff present. I I really believe in transparency at every level. I was a career waitress prior to my coming into the recovery community, and I worked for a restaurant owner that believed in complete transparency. So like I knew his salary. Every dollar that was spent in that restaurant was on paper and available to every employee to see. And I thought, gosh, if this restaurant owner can do this, I bet a lot of us nonprofits can. I believe in bringing volunteers into that picture, our coalition members. I believe in, really everybody having an understanding on the cash flow of our organization. So understanding how much money you currently have, what you expect to be coming in this year, next year, 2 years from now, noting where it's from and what you want to do with it. How much of that goes to salaries, and then how much unrestricted dollars do we have? How much do we have in restricted dollars, and what are those designated to? And of course, how much debt we have. What are we going to be paying out? And I thought this was a neat quip it phrase that I heard, is you can't decide where you're going if you don't know where you are now. Just kind of a common sense phrase, but I think sometimes we get wrapped up in the programming and the minutia, because these are all passion-based organizations. We all come from passion-based organizations. We're here because our hearts led us here. Sometimes we forget that there's a whole budget in the background happening every single day that we need to pay attention to. And it's the less fun part, really. I mean, for me, it was the less fun part was managing the budget, but it was completely necessary. We can go to the next slide. Here are just is a list of funding possibilities. Again, think about some out of the box thinking, I would say, is leveraging shared positions and resources. So maybe even if you need an additional staff person, maybe there's a way to, offer a full-time position by partnering with another organization that could use that share that staff person with you, so that that person is getting full-time hours. But you know that if it's at a time when your organization can't offer full-time hours. I'm going to say incorporating activities and services in organizations with similar missions. So again, that comes back to that partnership. So how can we really fuel what we do? Maybe suddenly we take our services and we perform those services within another organization. I'm not as familiar with the prevention field, but we often had our employees or peer specialists working for other organizations, and they were grant funded, so it came at no cost to that outside organization. We paid for them to work, but they performed their work at a offsite location. When it comes to applying for grants, again, have those relationships and partnerships built. We always see like the Bush Foundation has great community innovation grants they do every year, but we have to have those relationships built in order to respond to those RFPs. Of course, we all know about things like fundraisers and galas and those sorts of things, but something I hadn't thought about is, again, building relationships with community stakeholders who might leave an endowment to our organization. It's more common than I knew of when I came into an understanding of endowments, but a lot of people want to leave a financial legacy, and they might just fall in love with your organization and decide this is who I want to leave my legacy to, because this was a topic that was near and dear to my heart, and so they end up doing an endowment. And then you can always look at things like where membership fees and dues are possible. So if you do some sort of association and you start offering training and technical assistance, you can at least cover the cost. So that's a zero-sum program for you if you have some membership fees and dues. And of course we have, oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Dave.
When we train this piece, we look at it, there's a lot of options here of developing a diversified funding pie, if you will, and to select which of these, and you're going to talk about some criteria coming up, but to select the 3, 4, 5, 6, And then you're developing an action plan for each, because as you've mentioned, each of these takes a relationship. So let's be really intentional about building the relationships now so that we could, in 5 years, 2 years down the road, talk about how they can support us and let them understand what we're doing before we go ask for money in the future. So it's about identifying which of these are most relevant to our organization and then developing specific plans for how we're going to build each of these slices of the pie.
Mm-hmm. And always listing out even the, we know kind of who our typical funders are, but really looking at federal funders, state funders, county funders, and city funders. So in county and city, again, I would often overlook. But towards the end of my career, as I kind of had developed a little bit more running this recovery community organization, that county and city funding actually became more consistently, sustainably available than the state and federal funding, because they were directly impacted by my organization being in their county and their city. I could articulate to them how I was reducing recidivism by offering people peer recovery coaching services. I could demonstrate that to them. So it was very, again, it was in their backyard. So it was like the opposite of NIMBY. It was, yes, in my backyard. I want you here. I want you to keep existing in my city. And then next slide, please. So a little bit like Dave said, how to choose. So again, we don't want to, we really don't want to go after every single funding stream. We want to be aware of them. And then we want to pick a couple that we're really going to put our time and energy to. Very few small nonprofit organizations have the luck to have a full-time fund development person on their staff. And so oftentimes somebody's wearing multiple hats. And so these are just a set of questions that you can ask around those different, when you kind of say, here's 3 or 4 we want to look at, here's some further questions that you can ask, like what's the easiest? What's the most likely of success? What would we enjoy doing? How would any of these funding strategies change? So sometimes we get a windfall of money from oftentimes from a federal grant, but it's limited to 2 years. And so we want to think about what happens at year 2. And like we mentioned earlier, start that sustainability planning from day 1, understanding this round of funding might end. So how do we keep the same services going beyond that? And then of course, what aligns best with our mission. I'm going to kind of go through the last slide quick because I think I'm taking more than my amount of time.
No, you're okay, Chris. You can go through till 2:30, or I guess 12:30 your time. That's fine.
Sure. Okay. Okay. I just didn't want to seep into anybody else's time. And then again, just when we're making a financial sustainability plan, you want to know your current financial situation. Again, in writing with all your stakeholders, your staff, potentially coalition members, volunteers, people at the table, have an understanding of short and long-term goals and broad strategies you're going to use in which are usually visible and brought up in your strategic plan to reach those goals. And then of course, a timeline with specific actions. So that's where we get into some of the smart planning, that we have goals and times and make everything really clear about who's responsible for doing what. And then you always want to, it's nice to have an executive summary of all this work, kind of what are we doing and where are we going? Because when you send things out for people to review, a lot of times, if they get a 15-page planning document, if they're not a staff member of your organization, they're probably not going to read that whole 15-page document. So it's nice to summarize things in a executive summary that someone can just get kind of an overview of what's contained in that. And then that last link there, that Strong Nonprofits Toolkit, is a really, really great resource for nonprofits around financial planning. It has a ton of free tools that you can access, and then technical assistance really focused on those tools. And it was kind of a rabbit hole myself when I found it, and I went in and I was digging through it. So I would just say get familiar with that website, because they have a lot of different things that help when you go to write out your budget and develop your programs. A lot of tools there that'll hopefully be really useful to you. Any questions? I'm at the end of my session there. Stakeholders and finances are very important.
I would just add one thing that was really helpful. You know, in terms of stakeholder, I think the other end of the stick, you know, you've got partners and you've got volunteers and different segments that you're leveraging. I think it also applies to the board. You know, you need, you know, at the executive level, you need strong balance, and you need, you know, you need people that are working in these different areas that understand, you know, whether it's marketing or finance. They bring different skills to the board, and that's very, very important as you know, they bring oversight to a lot of these actions.
Yes. Well, and so I'll use an example I have is working for an RCO, a recovery community organization. We had a board full of incredibly passionate people, and no one was from business. No one knew how to properly run a budget, or a lot of oversight or risk management, or the things we actually needed from our board. And so it was really hard. It took several years to kind of help our board train the people we had on. There were some people that weren't interested in participating in an actual board, is what we found out. Like they were better suited for an advisory group to our organization versus a board member. And so we actually created an advisory group and offered some of our board members to transition to that, because they were really interested in helping decide what our programming would be. And then we brought in new members of the board, and we had an idea of, because we did the stakeholder mapping with our board about like what time, talents, what are your skills, what can you bring to the table. And now when I left, we had a really nice flushed out, rounded out board that had those relationships and those skills that we actually needed to have on a board. And so you can get creative too, because we didn't want to just say see ya to those board members that were passionate but maybe weren't the best fit for a board of directors. And so that peer advisory group was the perfect place for them. So there's, you know, again, sometimes you have to think of like how do we do this, but it is important, and it takes time to cultivate a really good working board.
Hey, Chris, I have a quick question. How many people, and I would assume it's based on the size of the organization, but how many people do you suggest on a board that's truly good and functional? You know, I know legally you have to have 3. At least here in the state of Georgia, you have to have 3 for your minutes and all that stuff. But do you have any like sort of parameter suggestions, or does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think for me, my opinion and my experience was this 5 to 9 zone is what I'll say. And so we had to have, my last organization, we actually had to have 8, I think, was in our, we were required
bylaws.
to have 8
bylaws.
Yeah. Thank you. And that was sometimes even too many, meaning we didn't get it. Just and so I think anything over 10 can be really cumbersome, and it could get things really weighted down. I think 3 for me would be a little too little, like not enough diverse perspective and opinions. But it's really, I think, mapping out too. I mean, you have those roles, like you want a board chair, you want a treasurer, you want a secretary, and then what are some other needs? Do you have someone that's like community engagement and relationships, and like what are some of those other roles? And I think that can help you determine what is the ideal number of board members for us, and then size of your organization too. But I'll let Dave and jump in, or Karen.
Just to follow up with what Elise said, the IRS says you have to have 3.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've seen other numbers up to 31. I think the point you mentioned at the very end is valuable, is what kind of roles do we want them to play, or perspective we want them to bring? And the bigger your organization, there may be bigger, like some coalitions I know on their board have the representatives of different committees serve on their board so they can provide that perspective. And so I think a lot of it depends on what your organization's doing in the organization chart, what that looks like. That can drive what the composition of the board is.
Yeah, and I just will add, my previous work experience was at a nonprofit, and we actually had a board of directors that was unbelievably large and not super clear on how it came about to be as large as it was. Like in our board of directors meetings, we could potentially have 100+ people. Because it was a membership organization where the members were actually the directors of the board. So just overall, there was a lot that needed to happen there to kind of correct what had happened organically. And we worked with a nonprofit lawyer to kind of help create and craft what would be a better kind of system for us. And one point that she kept hitting home that I think is important to kind of take into consideration is everybody, or I shouldn't say everybody, there are a lot of people who think that more means more diversity and democracy and decision making. But she kept saying, actually, what ends up happening with larger boards of directors is it's too unwieldy to make a decision. And you see that the executive committee is more or less making all the decisions because you can't get anything done anyway. So bigger isn't always better in that regard. And I found that a really interesting and meaningful thing to kind of learn, and important to educate people on if they feel like voices are going to be shut down by not allowing more and more people, that it was something to take into consideration, that yes, I understand that, but what is really possible with shared decision making with a large board.
Great points. Thanks so much, Chris. Great presentation. There's a lot of information here, and Dave's clapping appropriately. I want to remind folks that you can revisit some of this material when not only in the upcoming breakout, but when we do coaching sessions over the next month or so. So we can dive into that further, such important topics and a lot of information there. I also wanted to remind folks that the website that Chris mentioned, Strong Nonprofits, I provided a printout on some of their materials. I think it should be hot pink in your packet. Like I said, I have fun putting this together, and so take a look at that, because it really is a great site, but it is a rabbit hole. So maybe some of this, the printout might help you with that rabbit hole. And then also several of her slides were from the community toolbox that we've been talking about. So I printed out the table of contents of the toolbox. And again, hopefully some of this materials will be helpful to you. I know I just can't do everything on screen time. I need to look at some tangible printouts sometimes. So so this is in your packet as well. I think many of you have this in yellow. I ran out of yellow paper, so I went with the green. But hopefully that might help as well. So now we're ready for a break for 10 minutes. So we're gonna have Rachel tell us about the breakout process, which will start at 11:45 or 2:45 Eastern, 11:45 Pacific. And Chris, you're gonna have to figure out.
I'll do my own time change.
I can only handle 2 time zones at a time. But so let's do a 10-minute break, and then we're gonna have a half an hour breakout session where we'd like you to revisit your sustainability plan with your coach, and think about what we've talked about, and also think about how you'd like to structure your coaching sessions. Who wants to start?
This is Dave. I'll start on the left side, the continuum of care, talking about prevention with pathways to life. And we were very fortunate, but also I'm going to use the word burdened, is they've done a really nice job of getting member involvement in an assessment. So we spent a lot of, but they hadn't talked about it. They've each done the assessment. And so we spent a lot of time talking about what was their assessment. And they had also developed a nice document that had recommendations from that assessment, but again, they hadn't talked about it. So we spent a lot of time going through that assessment and then talking about how that will lead to a set of recommendations. And I'm going to turn over to Elise or anybody else from the team to just summarize what is the content of what we talked about, what is the content of our next steps, what is the focus of our next steps. So Ryan or Elise.
Ryan, you want to do it? Or do you want me to do it?
I'm sorry, I'm like at a coffee shop, so it might be a little bit difficult for me to do that. My room is now full with people. So, I mean, I think what we identified was the board pieces, and we have a strategic planning process that we've been working through that we need to kind of formalize. And I think there was another thing around IT that we're working through that was on there. I mean, it didn't really come up in our conversation as much, but I know those are kind of the three things that we strategically need to focus on. But Elise, I don't know if you want to add some thoughts here on our next steps and engaging with Dave around setting some goals specifically.
I mean, I think you got it.
And so again, so what the challenge is they've got a lot of pieces in place moving forward, and they've done a lot of good work. And they know they want to, the next step is to engage the board in this process so that they can own the results of the sustainability planning. So as Ryan said, there are three areas. One is getting the board together, getting them fully up to speed on this, integrating that with the work they've already done on their strategic plan. And then the IT piece is really about transparency, how we can give people all the information that they need in order to be up to speed on this. And so the next steps will be to just look at those things to say, how can we engage the board? Ryan talked about educating at the next board meeting with the board on this process. And then my next step is really to be decided about based on how they want to engage the board, and I'll support them in that process as well.
Great, thank you. Sounds very efficient. Anybody have anything else to add from that group?
I would just say is we've created some time to, because it takes time to convene and actually action these goals. I mean, we've done the survey. We had a good chat today with David. We've got a good list of we have to prioritize the list. We have goals and action items. I think we have 23 items on the list that we've identified. So now we have to prioritize, and we'll do that. We have a Monday operations call, strategy call Monday morning, and we'll spend some time talking about that. Ryan's already scheduled a board meeting for the end of the month, and is asking for more time. And a lot of what we talked about today will be brought to them in terms of starting to challenge and take it to the next level in terms of their governance. So I think we feel pretty good about where we are.
Yeah, getting it operationalized through existing meetings is really a big step.
I think one of the things that I mean, I laugh, but it's like we're growing up, and we've gone from our launch sort of phase to now we're in a new phase. And I think that some of what we see is just as a result of growth and change within the organization. And we've been at this a while. We're getting better. Our processes are more refined. What we're doing looks a little bit different, So I think we're growing. I laughed. I said, we're growing up.
That's great. Awesome. Well, I think having a full group participation is is a big plus. You can't do this alone. And I love the enthusiasm. So great. And then, so Dave, you all have a plan for your coaching, or your, if you want to rename that to something else, feel free. Oh, you're muted, Dave.
For everybody in our planning call yesterday, I was adamant about we need to come up with next steps and we'll plan our next meeting, and I failed to do that. So, but I will follow up with them to schedule our next meeting.
I'm just trying to make sure it's sustainable, Dave. No.
We we were yapping too much.
we did the same in our group. Great. Well, thank you.
Well, and I think Dave, we have a standing Monday 10 a.m. meeting with our strategy team. So if you ever want to join us, that's every Monday at 10. So
I think that'd be a great opportunity to do it, and we'll work out what's the best way for me to support you without getting in the way.
And don't forget, he has to get up really early to join us.
Not at all.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I don't know if we thought this through to have West Coast coaches with East Coast organizations, but
That's not a problem. That's not a problem.
Great. Well, that sounds fantastic. Thank you all. And then the other group is the arts group, which is a different type of organization, but really interested in working more with the community as a treatment organization while maintaining their identity and mission as a treatment provider. Anybody from that group want to give a quick summary?
I can start, and Sophie or Chris, feel free to jump in. So it was very helpful. After getting some feedback, we realized that we had actually identified an outcome as a goal instead of a goal. So we talked through that and identified really what our goal is, and a hopeful outcome is a contract with a local recovery court, and it feels much better to have a goal that we believe in and that is beneficial for the community regardless of the outcome. Even if we don't get the contract with this recovery court that we're hopeful to work with in the future, our goal remains the same of, if you're interested, specifically really like developing and beefing up our IOP or intensive outpatient program at our central Denver clinic. So that was super helpful. And then we dove into the strategy portion of the plan, and we're brainstorming a bunch of different strategies in order to help us reach that goal, which was also helpful because some things were brought up that even though our agency had explored, at least in my mind, I hadn't categorized those things as a strategy to reach the specific goal. So very helpful for that. So just a lot of clarity gained. Very appreciative.
Yeah, and we'll also pick a time to meet. That works for this group. And thanks, Chris, for joining. Chris actually has done some of the exact tasks that they're looking at, so big help. And Sophia has been coordinating some of these efforts, so this is a good team as well. Well, great. We'll continue those conversations in our future meetings. I love the idea of incorporating this into an existing meeting so that it doesn't have to be another thing on your to-do list, but it's already, scheduled and organized. That's always a huge help. So kudos for that. Great. All right. So for the rest of our time, we wanted to hear from Dave on a number of very practical issues and important issues. And Dave, you go ahead and use your full time. I had a cushion of time at the end, so please feel free to use the full time.
At 12:30, I'll shoot for, I think we said 20 minutes. Okay. Again, and what's exciting is what this presentation is not, this discussion is about. We've talked about everything already. So it's really just the frame for this is as we move forward with building the sustainability plans, it's just some thoughts to keep in mind and considerations for as we go through this. And so we'd love to hear your response, your thoughts about these. And this is just a way of organizing some considerations. And the goal of sustainability, the way we frame it, is especially we work with a lot of volunteer coalitions. It's really the sustainability discussion is about the community, the volunteers saying, how are we going to continue to run this organization in the future long enough to term our long-term vision, our long-term goals. So it's really about building that ownership among staff, among volunteers, among board members. And there are three elements that we'll talk about today for your consideration moving forward. And it's about having a common shared vision. A lot of these are based on collective impact as well. And please interrupt me if you want to add anything or ask questions. The first is about having that shared vision, that common goal. It's about how we share or use collaborative leadership techniques as appropriate. And then as we're recruiting people, recruit them in a way that they will build ownership and involvement. And we've talked about all these things as we go through this. So if you go to the next slide, please. And just to, we talked about this, was fun when we were talking about the vision piece of this, but if you've read Simon Sinek, Start With Why, what he says, why people get involved and stay involved is not the what. I'm summarizing, if anybody is an expert on this, please share. But if people don't get involved or stay involved because of what the coalition does or how it goes about it, but why the coalition is doing what it's doing, what is the vision of the organization. So it's the goal of an organization to build that ownership and involvement is to clarify what is its why. And we've talked about this. What is the individual person, the board members, the volunteers, why for getting involved with the organization, and make sure we're meeting that person's why. And there's fit between what the coalition is, purpose is, and what the individual's reason for becoming involved is. Thoughts about that, comments? And so I'll just keep moving. So the way that the organization typically states its why is through its vision statement. And there's some talk about the difference between a vision and a mission. A vision obviously is what our dream is for the future, what we want to achieve, what we want it to look like. We can have some debates over whether a vision is achievable or not, but it's really this future goal for what we want to see happen as a result of our efforts. The mission statement is a statement of how we as an organization is going to move forward to achieve that vision. Some organizations, as we'll see, merge those two. They may call them a vision or a mission, but it's really the vision is our picture of the future. The mission is how we're going to achieve that, how we're going to work to achieve that. Again, this is what drives people. This is why people get involved with an organization. And so the next few slides are just to confirm Pathways to Life. And if you, I think you can share their vision statement. Go ahead, yeah. And again, it talks about their vision is cultivating meaningful connections. That's what they want to see, of people connected with students and parents, stakeholders, and their ultimates to build a strong community. Anybody just from Pathways to Life? They didn't know I was going to share this, but anybody talking about how you use your vision?
Can you ask the question again, Dave? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, how do you use the vision and to motivate people to share this is about what our organization's all about?
So we use it in context with our methodology, which is we call it the greenhouse model. And it's really about, if you think about a greenhouse, and a greenhouse is efficating. And so basically it's if you let the good things in, it produces good soil, and then the growth can happen from within that context. And so our part of our mission is that whole prevention, crisis intervention, and support. How do we do it? We do it by supporting students and families in the community and providing prevention, crisis intervention, and support. And so that's how we segue in.
And so again, the people that we want to engage, the stakeholders that we talked about earlier, we need to communicate that to them in a way that they can say, yeah, that's something I want to be a part of. That's something I see that I want to see us achieve this future of building a strong community.
Yeah,
Right, and
Dave,
we call that
if we don't
it's a
story
BHAG.
brand.
It's your
Yeah.
BHAG, and you do it through,
Right.
yes, we did it through Story Brand, but your BHAG is your big, hairy, audacious goal. What do you want to do that you couldn't do if you didn't have other people helping you? If it's not too big for you to do by yourself, then it's not big enough.
Yeah, Dave, one of the ways that we do that is through a narrative. And so we start off by saying how everyone really wants their communities to be a great place, right? And at the same time, there's no question that the overall health of a community and wellness of a community is directly connected to the health and wellness of its young people. And then we talk about the challenges, obviously, that young people face today that are unique to today's, not just unique to kids, because it's always been that way, but unique to today's world. And how, understanding that can leave people overwhelmed and feeling like, man, how can I make a difference, and how can I be a part of something to address that? And so, and get that, it's kind of the narrative we say. We get that, and we give them an opportunity to say, hey, this is how we approach that, and you can partner with us, and what does it look like for you to bring yourself and meaningfully connect with us around, delivering this approach, you know what I mean? And so it kind of gives them that connection to their own community and how they can lean in to be a part in whatever way they can.
And it's great that you're able to articulate it so well. And for sustainability purposes, that's going to build ownership. When people clearly understand what you're about and they can build that ownership of it, they're more likely to want to stay involved and to see that the organization will continue. And again, that's the importance of building that vision. And I just put in the coalition you're working with. You've also got a vision statement for that. It's very similar. It's very clear. If you go to the next slide, please. Again, for One Johns Creek, one community gathered together to address one problem, youth substance use, with one goal to reduce youth substance use. Very clear what we want to try to achieve, and hopefully that is achievable in the long term. Very clear that if I want to get involved with that, this is the A statement that will help me buy into and own the coalition. Comments about this vision?
It's already changed.
and that's a point about this. If we can engage our board, our steering committees in updating the vision periodically, they will own that, and they'll want to see the organization continue because they own a part of that vision making. So it's okay to update, enhance, tweak your visions if you're doing it in a way that your board members, your stakeholders are involved in it. Excellent. So just go to the next one. And for the next two groups, for the arts, I couldn't find the vision statement, but when you look at this vision, it is a piece of both vision and mission. So the mission is to improve the quality of life, and through the application of scientifically supported prevention, education, and treatment services. What their goal is to improve the quality of life, and their mission is, here's how we're going to go about doing it. Any just thoughts, comments on this? And then just to show the next one is for LRCC. It's the same thing. They called it their mission. There may be a vision statement. I couldn't find it on the website. But the whole point is here, and as Elise just said, if we can periodically update these and make sure that for our board, our stakeholders, it's clear what our vision is and mission is, and do they have a stake in working to achieve that, they're more likely to want to see the organization be sustained. So any comments, thoughts on this?
It's funny being in the same space. I mean, they didn't look at our vision statement most likely before they created, and our verbiage is very similar. Yeah. Just you find those similar nuances.
And so the point is, it's the statement themselves, or can be, if you can say, even generic. The point is, do the board members, do stakeholders own that vision and buy into that vision? How do we go about doing that? And so the next slide is just to have a discussion, and for your further consideration is if we think about how do we communicate our vision to partners, consumers, stakeholders? How do we reinforce individuals for being involved in it? Are they involved in updating the vision? Are they involved in achieving? And do we provide multiple opportunities for them to engage in ways that meets their, we talked about this earlier, their reasons for wanting to be involved. We talked about assets. Are they able to use their assets in a way that's meaningful to them, that works toward their vision for being involved in this? Thoughts about this? Again, the thought is as we go forward, let's engage stakeholders in owning this vision. Thoughts, comments about this?
I love it. I think it's great. I mean, I think Pathways again does this very well. We have emails, social media, they're recording video, they're slicing and dicing the video to serve the mission and the vision and the story in all sorts of different ways. It's all very professionally produced. And it reinforces individuals' reasons for being involved. And it's, you know, I think we can turn up the volume a bit more on the multiple opportunities to participate. And I think that just comes down to bandwidth, width, and managing more and leading more people. We're getting better at that, but we still have a ways to go, especially on the volunteer side. I mean, this is good. I mean, I think we're doing these things. Certainly 2 of the 3 of them really well.
And I love how you're having people record their videos about their involvement. That's getting them to own. If their pictures and their videos on the website, they're going to own that and want to see the organization continue. That's excellent. Okay, I'm going to move to the next one again, and we've talked about these. The next one, if you've ever read Dr. Fran Butterfoss's book, Coalitions and Partnerships in Community Health, kind of the Bible of, you can see I've got my book all earmarked here, kind of the Bible of coalitions. But essentially what she talks about is transformational or collaborative leadership. And basically it's a collection of personal skills and qualities that are typically not found in one individual, but rather in a group of committed leaders who have grassroots community support. So basically collaborative leadership, transformational leadership is when multiple people are involved in running and owning and leading an organization. They're going to have ownership because of their involvement. If you go to the next slide, please. And so there's ways we can do that. One way is we can talk about all the different, this is just an org chart, if you will, from a coalition where you've got steering committees, you have a coalition, you have different work groups. Earlier, Chris talked about having an advisory board and a board of directors that play different roles. The point is, let's engage members, volunteers, stakeholders in different aspects of the coalition. Again, they can't be at every one of these meetings, but let's engage them. If they are engaged and everything isn't staff-led, they're more likely to own those. When I was a coalition leader, I would purposely schedule my committee meetings, our committee meetings at the same time, so I couldn't be at any. And I made sure that the chair of each committee knew what they were going to do, had the resources, but they owned what they decided in their committee meetings. So the whole point is, let's make sure people are involved in have an opportunity to be involved in multiple ways in the organization in different leadership roles. And just the next piece is, again, when you look at another way of looking at the same thing is, when you think about the decisions that people are making, we always say people own what they create, people own what they decide. So when you look at all these different types of decisions, everything from, again, writing our vision mission statement, determining what our budget's going to be, the more people are involved appropriately in these decisions, the more they're going to own those decisions and want to see that the decisions are followed through on. So this is just the purpose of this is to say there's a lot of decisions organizations make. What's the right way to involve the different people in those decisions appropriately? Again, if it's the color of the table clause for the picnic you're going to have, we don't need to have the board of directors spend 20 minutes deciding the color of the table clause. We can have someone do that. But if it's going to be deciding, do we go for this grant? Let's have the right people involved with that, because they're going to, if they say yes, they're going to be more involved in getting the grant and implementing it. So again, there is a lot of opportunity to engage different people in the decision making. And even just for our sustainability planning, I think one more click will get us to the print. If we engage in the sustainability plans you're developing, can we onboard it? And I know that Pathways to Life is saying, how can we involve our board members in prioritizing our sustainability plan? What are the next steps? I think if you click once more, you'll see some print here. So how do we engage members in identifying the strategies? How do we engage stakeholders in, if they decide the strategies, they're more likely to want to help to implement those strategies. So again, people own what they create, people own what they decide, people own what they lead. So the next point, just to keep us moving, is to say, as we move through this process, how are we, I'll go to the next slide, how are we engaging multiple opportunities for people to engage in leadership roles? And this is with our sustainability planning and in general. And then how are we engaging people in decision making? Are we getting, again, the right people involved so they can own the decisions that they make? So what thoughts do you have about this? Again, just considerations for moving forward as we develop our sustainability plans.
I had a colleague that was just discussing, I can't remember what he called it. Basically, it's where you reward folks that are in treatment for the work that they're doing, and doing it in a way of involving family members. So they put funds in an account, and then the clinic is able to sort of reward the patients for sustained sobriety as well.
Once you're moving into the next piece, we're going to talk about recruiting and retaining, but really you're involving them in the process. And that's the goal of this. We could easily, and again, as a coalition leader, I could easily develop a work plan in 10 minutes, but that's my work plan. If I take 3 weeks and I develop and I engage members in developing that work plan, that's their work plan, they're going to want to see it implemented effectively. So again, it's all about engaging people in this process. And then the third piece, just to keep us moving, is what we talk about targeted recruiting. And this has to do with both volunteers, but think about implementing our plans as we recruit people to the plan. But basically, it's, we always like to say it's getting the right person to the right meeting at the right time. So building coalition membership, it's that match that we talked about earlier that Chris talked about. Once we know what people are interested in them, is how do we get them involved appropriately? And again, one example of Coalition Cincinnati, Procter & Gamble's headquarters is in Cincinnati. The marketing director from Procter & Gamble said, I want to join the coalition. They said, great, we'd love to have you do marketing for us. He said, no, I want to work with young people. So let's get that person to the meeting where they can work with young people. They're going to be more likely to be involved in that. And if you go out to the CADCA work site, or just do a Google search on CADCA primer, there's a good primer out there on building capacity to do the work. We talk in that about targeted recruiting. Let's go to the next slide, please. Again, targeted recruiting means, and we've talked a lot about this today, transparency. People getting the right person, the right meeting at the right time, meaning let's share them. What is our organization chart? So they can see, how do I want to get involved in this organization? What are our timelines? When do I want to get involved? Let's show people our action plans and say, here's our action plans. Can you help us prioritize? Which of these actions do you want to be involved with? The more people are involved in, one, understanding what the coalition's doing or the organization's doing, and two, decision-making about it, they're more likely to want to find where they can best fit. When they've done research on why people stay involved with coalition is because they feel they have an active role in decision-making and they have an active role in achieving the goals of the organization. When they're working in a place where they fit, they're more likely to achieve those. And so the last piece is just, I think you talked about this on session 1, and it's what you just talked about, Sophia, is people are involved when they're rewarded for their involvement, when they see the results of what they're doing. And so how do we, as we go through all this, how do we build people's involvement when that people stay involved, when they have relationships with people, when they have a role? When you ask someone, what's your role on the coalition? They say, well, I show up every 3rd Tuesday of the month and I eat your chicken sandwiches. That's not a role on the coalition. My role is I'm working on this committee and we're working to get youth involved in prevention activities. that's their role, they're more likely to want to stay involved. I think you talked about this earlier, but let's be intentional about making sure that each of these R's is part of our working with our stakeholders. With that, I'm just going to finish up. I think I'm right on time here. Is to just say, how do you engage in targeted recruiting? Meaning, and we talked about this earlier with Chris's piece and working with stakeholders. How are we matching them to the right place to get involved with our organization? And are we being intentional about building relationships and roles and respecting people and rewarding them and sharing results? How are we doing that on an intentional basis?
Thank you, Dave. Any questions on that piece?
Dave, can you go back one slide? I just want to get a screenshot of that. Thanks.
And what I will do is in this next piece, we have a little cheat sheet on this. I'll put that in the chat box.
Yeah, and all the slides from both learning sessions are available on our website. I just wanted to remind folks of that, so you can reference those. I put the link in earlier in the chat, but again, you can always reach out to Rachel and I if you have any issues navigating the resources on the site. Thanks, Dave. This group could do a 5-hour webinar without any room for pause, I think, but we filled up our 2.5 hours quite well. But so I will wrap us up with another part of sustainability that I do want to, that is important to touch on. Rachel, could you do the next slide, please? Is getting back on track. So thinking about, you've done all this good work, you've got meetings where you talk about your goals and sustaining things. And what if you find out that things are getting off track in some way? And this is very different for different types of organizations. In a treatment organization, it may be seen that people aren't going to counseling, or they're not filling their scripts, or a number of other things. And then in coalitions and other groups, there might be a whole different types of things that you measure or monitor to see if things are going as planned. But getting back on track is a really important part of that. And we can post more information on this. There's actually a nice piece on this in one of the references, which is a Veterans Administration manual on facilitating implementations. But getting kind of back to the basics, checking in with your team, figuring out who your champion is, are they still there? Thinking about, identifying who's responsible for this process. There's some really basic process improvement tools that you can apply. There's like a 1-page description of a very brief look at planning, making a change, studying the change, and then seeing what your next actions should be, called Plan, Do, Study, Act. And then go back to your resources, thinking about re-looking at some of the tools that we've talked about. And of course, keeping your plan going, revisiting it periodically. And your plan might not be a standalone sustainability action plan anymore. It actually might be part of your strategic plan or other documents that exist, but making sure that you revisit it and think about it periodically. And that's what your desktop calendar is for 2021, to go back and say, oh, did we look at our sustainability plan recently? And you'll have to get your own calendar for 2022, but that'll get you practicing that for a year. And then just kind of getting back to where we started at our first learning session, is just the responsibility we have to our program recipients that they've had so many losses in their lives, and for us to come in and give them some hope over a period of time, only to have the program change or go away or be out of reach, just can cause another level of loss for folks. So this commitment to continuing to do all the good work you've worked so hard to do. And then one of my favorite quotes from Dave, which is, I guess, a CADCA quote, which is, "Don't leave your change to chance." It's a little bit of a tongue twister, but it's very handy. Don't leave your change to chance.
Jump in here,
Dave.
along those lines, I put in the chat box 3 documents. One is the 6R trainer notes that David asked for. I put the CADCA capacity primer in, and then their sustainability primer. And it's just really, that's what don't leave your change to chance is all about. So you'll see very similar concepts in those documents.
Perfect. And we'll get those on our website. Excellent. And then the final slide, there's Dave's quote. And then the final slide on next steps. So our next steps, as we talked about, are coaching calls. We would like to establish sort of a target date to complete a plan by March 1st. And you can do it sooner if you wrap up, but that we could have an opportunity to come back together one more time in mid-March and share our plans. I think we talked about maybe March 19th. So Rachel will be in touch. That's a Friday. And we just love to have one more opportunity to go over our plans. And we could keep that meeting to an hour and just hear about what you all have learned and answer any final questions. And then on behalf of our team, I just want to say thank you. We really appreciate your participation. We know it's hard to take time out for additional efforts, but it's sounding to me that it's getting integrated with all the things that you're doing, which is just music to our ears. And this is our first Sustainability Institute through ORN, but we hope to do more in the future. And we'd love to get your feedback. Anything that you think that could improve this in any way, anything that worked really well for you, we'd love to hear your feedback. And you can email that to Rachel